hate to think, I don't know, man. It's just weird that it's here. And I don't know if there was more than one thing out here. We inherited this house from our mother.
Right.
It's all our mother's stuff.
Okay.
I don't really know too much about it.
Oh, yeah, it looks like there's a rope. It's literally like she... And it's just not her. The words drift out of a police body cam, muffled, uncertain, but they capture the moment when an ordinary welfare check turned into something far darker. In May 2020, officers in Westerville, Ohio responded to a routine call. A husband reported his wife missing. What they didn't realize was that within seconds of stepping inside his house, they had entered a timeline that would end with one of the strangest true crime stories in the state's history. This is The Final Hour, and today we examine the unbelievable case of Matthew Moore and Emily Noble, a story where coincidence, tragedy, and suspicion collide in a way that challenges the very definition of guilt. At 3:14 p.m. on a Monday, Matthew Moore dialed 911 and reported that his wife Emily had vanished. The dispatcher expected a frantic caller, but instead Matthew's tone was composed, methodical.
Really? Matt, he said?
Yes, more. Yeah, girl. My wife, Emily Noble, whatever it was, has been missing all day. Her purse is here with her ID, the car is here with her car keys, and her phone is here.
When officers arrived, he met them at the door and spoke clearly. No tears, no panic, only a list of facts.
Her wallet's here. Here's her wallet. ID's in there. Some money. Her phone's here. Car's in the garage. I've been up since 10, probably.
Her wallet is here. Her phone is here. The car is in the garage, he told them. She likes to forage for wild edibles, probably just went for a walk. But police noticed something immediately. Despite his certainty that she was gone, Matthew had made no effort to look for her himself. On-screen text. 7 hours missing, 0 search effort. It was the first tiny crack in what would soon become a fractured portrait of a husband and his missing wife. Inside, the home looked untouched. The bed made, the air still. Emily's wallet, keys, and phone rested on her nightstand as if she had only stepped away for a moment. To investigators, that scene wasn't reassuring. It was unnerving. A missing person who leaves behind every possession rarely walks back through the door. I have this gut feeling right here. It's the same one I had when my son died. The statement caught the officer off guard. Most spouses cling to hope. Matthew Moore was already imagining the worst. To understand why that comment matters, we need to look back. Just 1 year earlier, Matthew and Emily's teenage son, Joey, had gone missing. His body was found in a wooded park near their home. The cause was self-inflicted. For a family to endure such loss once is unthinkable. For it to happen again is almost beyond belief. And Emily's first husband? He too had taken his own life years earlier. 3 lives connected by one terrible pattern. And now, as Emily Noble disappeared, officers couldn't ignore the echoes of the past. The next moment would later haunt investigators. While speaking with police in the garage, Matthew pointed to a cord hanging from a rack and said, "This doesn't belong here. Usually hangs over there." Then he asked a question no one expected. "Can she reach that? She's very short."
Why is this here?
And her mom passed away and out of a car crash, correct? Okay.
I don't know. All I know, this is, we went to that spring and filled it up with the spring water.
That's the spring water.
When I got home.
Your phone rang.
I just brought it home and put it there.
The officer noted the comment and moved on. At the time, it seemed like nervous rambling. Months later, that very detail would become the spine of a murder indictment. For viewers joining us for the first time, you're watching The Final Hour. Real cases, real evidence, real mysteries. If you want to see how truth can hide in plain sight, remember to subscribe so you never miss the moment justice turns unexpected. 2 days after Emily disappeared, detectives invited Matthew to the station for a voluntary interview. The door didn't lock. He was free to leave at any time. But before questions began, he made a statement that set the tone for everything to come.
I could leave if I want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I'm just,
You try that door right now.
at some point, could we, I want to help you. I want to get this going because I didn't do it, and I want you to find whatever the hell happened to her.
Me too.
I want it to happen.
I didn't do it. No one had accused him of anything yet, but he was already defending himself. You're not under arrest, we're just talking. Detectives asked a simple question. When was the last time he saw his wife? Matthew's answers shifted like sand. First, he said she sent a group text at 3:45 p.m. Then he corrected himself. It was 8:45 a.m. After that, he mentioned a neighbor who claimed to see her at 10 o'clock. But that neighbor later admitted he might have been mistaken about the day.
Your head was bent. Went from being in uptown. You talked. So you don't remember what time you came back from uptown?
We came directly from, I think our last bar was not the Hook Line Center, what's that other old school? Bag and Nails. And I think I have the receipt. It was only for 20, we got fish fry.
Every time the detectives closed one gap, another opened. Matthew's story wasn't simply confusing, it was contradictory. In criminal investigation, inconsistency is often the first sign of control, a person editing their own timeline to fit a narrative. On-screen text. Every correction is a confession in disguise. Over the next hour, detectives noticed something else. Matthew referred to Emily in the past tense. She was emotional. I loved her. She would have done it close to home. Linguists call this temporal leakage. It happens when someone unconsciously describes an event as already complete. For investigators, it was a red flag too bright to ignore. Still, no physical evidence tied Matthew to a crime. All they had were words, and words can lie. Then came the question that changed the room. Did she like to be choked? One detective asked. Matthew paused. No, he said. Then, after a beat, yes, but not to the point where she couldn't breathe. Detectives produced messages from one of Emily's friends, texts suggesting that she had once appeared with bruises and had explained them away. Matthew insisted it was consensual, but what detectives heard was a possible mechanism of death. They didn't press charges, not yet, but they knew they needed something objective, a test he couldn't argue with. Matthew volunteered for a computer voice stress analysis, a modern version of a lie detector. He was confident it would prove his innocence. But technology doesn't bend to belief. When asked, "Do you know where Emily is?" the software spiked. Signs of deception. Detectives stepped out to review the data. One looked at the screen and said quietly, "This is not good." The report flagged deceptive stress patterns on two critical questions. Do you know where she is? And did you kill Emily Noble? To investigators, that wasn't proof of murder, but it was enough to push the conversation to its breaking point. They returned and confronted him directly. You did not do well, one detective said. The machine shows you know more than you're telling us. Matthew shook his head. I'm just nervous. Nervous men don't predict crime scenes, the detective replied. Then came the accusation heard across the room. You killed her. Matthew stood up, voice cracking. No, I didn't. The detectives pressed harder, each statement now a test of pressure and truth. Finally, he asked, Am I free to leave? Yes, they said. And he did, walking out into the hall a free man, but not a forgotten one. Over the following weeks, Westerville police searched everywhere. Parks, rivers, and the forest where Matthew's son had been found a year earlier. Nothing. No sign of Emily Noble. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, interviewed neighbors, traced cell tower pings. Every lead dissolved into silence. For the public, the story began to fade. But detectives refused to let go. Something about Matthew's calm demeanor and his eerie mention of that cord kept echoing in their minds. 4 months later, that echo would return in the most chilling way imaginable. 4 months later, Emily Noble would be found exactly as Matthew Moore described. You're watching The Final Hour. If stories like this keep you on edge, take a moment to subscribe. Every week we bring you real investigations that remind us how fragile truth can be, and how often it hides in plain sight. 4 months. For 122 days, Westerville police chased every possible lead. They combed wooded paths, drained ponds, and searched along the bike trail Emily used to walk. They brought in cadaver dogs, drones, and volunteers. Nothing. To most, it seemed Emily Noble had vanished from the earth itself. But detectives couldn't forget what Matthew said that first day in his garage, about a Concorde, and about how short Emily was. The image stayed lodged in their minds, a whisper they couldn't silence. On September 16, 2020, 3 women were walking through a small park less than a mile from the Noble Moore home. It was a quiet path, one search teams had already covered. But that afternoon, sunlight cut through the trees differently, and one of the women froze. Beneath the low branches of an oak, she saw something pale, a shape too still to belong to nature. "Call 911, she whispered. Within minutes, officers arrived. They knew instantly that this was the call they'd been dreading. The body of the Emily Noble was found beneath that tree. Near her hand lay a water bottle, half filled with a peach-colored drink. Her wedding ring and engagement band rested neatly beside her. A USB-style cord looped around her neck and over a branch. Everything looked deliberate, as if placed for someone to find. On-screen text, exactly as Matthew Moore had described. Officers stood in silence. They'd searched this same park for months, and somehow missed her. But the scene told another story. Emily had been there all along. As daylight faded, investigators documented everything: the cord, the rings, the position of the body. Then came the moment of realization. The arrangement of the scene matched, almost word for word, the description Matthew Moore had given police 4 months earlier. Even the type of cord, a small white USB cable, was identical. He didn't just predict how she'd be found, he narrated it. What had once sounded like a grieving husband's anxiety now felt like a blueprint. The coroner performed an autopsy. Ligature asphyxiation. Manner of death? Undetermined. It could be self-inflicted or staged. The fractures in her neck bones might indicate either. Westerville detectives reopened the case as a potential homicide. They rewatched every second of body cam footage from that first day. And there it was. The moment Matthew pointed to the cord in his garage. Side by side, the images were impossible to ignore. The garage cable, the park cable, same thickness, same design, same impossible coincidence. Investigators now believed Matthew Moore hadn't predicted Emily's death. He had rehearsed it. On June 17, 2021, 1 year after Emily's disappearance, police surrounded the couple's home. At 6:45 a.m., officers announced, "Matthew Moore, you are under arrest for the murder of Emily Noble."
Hands over your feet!
Can you see him good?
His elbow, I can see him good.
Coming up on your left.
Look. Matt, use your left hand and unlock the door. Only your left hand. Put your hands back on your head. Do not move.
Yes, sir. Ready for it? Stick both your hands out this way, Matt. Both of them straight.
Seatbelts on, seatbelts on.
That's just listen to what you're being told.
All right. Take that and undo your seatbelt, all right?
Hey, I got contact and cover when he pulls them off.
All right. Keep your hands right where they're at, all right?
Coming off.
He emerged quietly, barefoot, wearing a gray t-shirt. He didn't resist. He didn't ask why. As officers led him away, he simply said, "Yes, sir." His calm was chilling. Moore was charged with 2 counts of murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. Prosecutors alleged he killed Emily after an argument, then staged the scene to mirror his son's death. News of the arrest shook Westerville. Friends described Emily as vibrant, gentle, always smiling. Many struggled to believe the same man who had led search efforts early on could be responsible. Others said they were never surprised, that his composure had always felt rehearsed. The story spread across Ohio's evening news. Husband charged in wife's death, predicted scene months before.
Getting a deeper look into Matthew Moore and the murder trial there.
You'll remember that he's the man accused of killing his wife, Emily Noble, and then staging her death to look like a suicide.
Social media turned the case into a national conversation about grief, guilt, and the fine line between coincidence and confession. For detectives, the arrest was validation. For prosecutors, it was just the beginning. Investigators spent the next year reconstructing every second of Matthew Moore's timeline. They charted phone records, GPS data, and fitness tracker steps. Surveillance showed Matthew leaving home early that morning, alone, and returning hours later. Inside his home computer, they found searches for suicide statistics and ligature methods. Prosecutors said this was proof of staging. Defense attorneys said it was the behavior of a grieving man revisiting trauma. Every shred of evidence seemed to cut both ways, a double-edged narrative that neither side could fully control. As the story gained attention, true crime forums lit up. Some called it the predictive murder case. Others accused investigators of targeting a man for being too composed. Commenters dissected every pause, every facial expression from the body cam footage. Once again, tragedy had become entertainment, and truth blurred behind speculation. Through it all, Matthew sat in jail, awaiting trial, maintaining his innocence. "I loved my wife," he told reporters. "I didn't hurt her." Forensic psychologists studying the case offered contrasting views. Some saw a textbook narcissist, a man drawn to control, whose calm demeanor masked deep resentment. Others argued he displayed genuine grief consistent with survivor's guilt, a pattern common among families who lose loved ones to suicide. The debate underscored why this case fascinated so many, because every fact seemed to point in two directions at once. The trial date was set for August 2022. After a year in county jail, Matthew Moore would finally face a jury of 12, each asked to decide whether his words were prophecy or confession. Prosecutors prepared to argue that no man could describe a suicide scene so precisely unless he created it himself. The defense would insist that coincidences and investigative bias had turned a grieving husband into a suspect. On the first morning of trial, Matthew Moore looked smaller than the man seen on the body cam a year earlier. His hair was grayer, his voice quieter. As cameras clicked, he nodded once to his attorney and waited for the proceedings to begin. Outside, supporters of Emily Noble held photos and candles. They wanted justice, but they also wanted closure. The judge's gavel struck once. State of Ohio versus Matthew Moore. The final hour had begun. You're watching The Final Hour. If these real investigations move you, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Each week we uncover the hidden truths behind the cases that haunt headlines. Stories where answers aren't simple, and time is the only witness that never lies. August 2022. After 2 years of rumor and reconstruction, the state of Ohio versus Matthew Moore finally began. Prosecutors stepped forward first, presenting a simple story with dark undertones. That Matthew Moore killed his wife Emily Noble, staged her death to mirror past family tragedies, and predicted the scene because he created it. The defense countered that the state was weaving a narrative from grief and coincidence. No DNA, no eyewitnesses, no confession. 12 jurors sat between those two versions of truth. The state spent days establishing motive and method. They showed Matthew's internet searches for suicide methods and ligature types. They played snippets of body cam footage where he volunteered details no one had asked for. Her wallet's here. Her phone's here. She's short. each line replayed like a confession hidden in plain sight. The USB cord became the state's symbol of foreknowledge. Side-by-side images of the garage cord and the one found around Emily's neck filled the courtroom screens. This was no prediction, the prosecutor told jurors. It was a practice run. The jury watched as experts in forensic linguistics analyzed his speech patterns, the past tense references, the temporal leakage. They played his polygraph tape where he claimed innocence but showed deceptive stress responses. For prosecutors, each data point was a pixel in a larger portrait of control. The defense opened with a different question. If Emily Noble had died by her own hand, would we be here today? They called friends who testified Emily struggled after the death of Matthew's son. Her grief, they said, was profound, but private. The defense argued police fixated on Matthew because they couldn't accept a second suicide in the same family. They displayed photographs of the search area, showing how dense the woods were, suggesting the initial search missed her body, not because it was staged, but because it was hidden by nature. One forensic expert for the defense recreated the scene using a dummy and a cord identical to the one found. The experiment showed it was possible for a person of Emily's height to have arranged the cord herself. Possible, the expert emphasized, does not mean probable, but it means the state cannot say impossible, and that is reasonable doubt. The state's forensic anthropologist described fractures in Emily's neck bones that he said matched manual strangulation. The coroner, however, classified the manner of death as homicide, but admitted under cross-examination that self-infliction could not be excluded. The jury heard two scientific languages argue over the same bones, and in that disagreement lay the seed of doubt the defense needed. True crime often turns on moments like this, not when a jury hears something shocking, but when they realize two truths can exist at once. Viewers of the trial noticed what police had noticed 2 years earlier: Matthew's composure. He rarely looked at the jury. He took notes. He rarely cried. For the prosecution, this was coldness. For the defense, discipline. The human mind reads emotion like evidence, and often gets it wrong. After 3 weeks, both sides rested. Closing arguments lasted nearly 5 hours. The state reminded jurors of the impossible coincidence: the cord, the rings, the prediction. They said Matthew Moore was a man who needed control over his narrative even in death. The defense warned the jury against convicting a man for being unusual. Suspicion, they said, is not science. 12 people would decide what truth meant. After less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. We, the jury, find the defendant, Matthew Moore, not guilty. The words hung in the air, weightless and heavy all at once. Matthew bowed his head and sobbed. The judge spoke quietly over the noise. Convicting the wrong person, he said, will never serve true justice. On-screen text. Verdict, not guilty on all counts. Outside, reporters surrounded the defense team. One asked, "What will Matthew do now?" His lawyer answered, "He'll try to live." For Emily's friends and family, there was no such freedom. They believed a killer had walked away. But the law is not about belief. It's about the burden of proof. Emily Noble's death remains listed as undetermined. Neither murder nor suicide, just uncertainty frozen in time. Online, the case refused to die. True crime forums analyzed every body cam frame, every polygraph graph line. Some called it a miscarriage of justice. Others called it a warning about how circumstantial evidence can ruin lives. On Reddit and YouTube, millions watched the footage and debated the same question. Did Matthew Moore predict his wife's death? Or did he plan it? In the echo chamber of the internet, the difference between fact and feeling has never been smaller. Journalists who covered the trial said it was one of the most emotionally conflicted cases they'd ever seen. Every time you were convinced he was guilty, one writer said, the next witness made you doubt everything again. That's what makes this story so haunting. Not because we don't know what happened, but because we can't agree on what truth looks like when evidence and emotion collide. In the end, Emily Noble's story is not just about crime, it's about the fragility of perception. A husband's calm becomes evidence. A cord becomes the motive. A prediction becomes proof. But somewhere between science and speculation lies a woman who deserved to be remembered for how she lived, not how she died. For the detectives, it was a case that refused to close. For viewers of The Final Hour, it's a reminder that sometimes justice and truth walk separate roads. Matthew Moore left court a free man. Emily Noble left this world without answers. The case stands as a mirror for our own need to make sense of chaos. Because sometimes the question isn't who did it, but what do we need to believe so we can sleep at night? You've been watching The Final Hour, where every case ends but the questions never do. If you believe in examining truth from every angle, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And if Emily Noble's story moved you, share this video, because sometimes justice begins with awareness. Not every mystery ends in a verdict. Some end in a question that haunts forever. The Final Hour.